Welcome to F for Forensics, the podcast where we dive deep into the bits and bytes of the digital world.
And hello there. Ready to go a bit deeper this time?
Absolutely. Welcome back, everyone. This is our second deep dive. If you caught our first one, you know we like to get into the real nitty-gritty.
Yeah, definitely check that out if you missed it.
But for now, we're heading down a fascinating, maybe slightly scary rabbit hole. We're talking firmware forensics, going beyond the operating system.
Exactly. It's this area that, well, it often gets overlooked, doesn't it? We focus so much on the Windows or Linux or Mac OS layer.
The stuff we actually see.
Right. But underneath all that, there's this foundational software. And sometimes that's where the really interesting or really persistent stuff hides.
Okay, let's start basic. Firmware. The name sounds solid. What exactly is it? Give us the groundwork.
Think of it as like the software that's baked right onto the hardware itself. It's super low-level code.
Low-level meaning?
Meaning it sits between the physical hardware components, the chips, the controllers, and the main operating system that you interact with. It's the initial set of instructions that lets the hardware even talk to the OS, sort of translator.
Got it. So like the stage crew setting everything up before the main actors, the OS? Come on.
Those are a pretty good analogy, yeah.
Okay, so where is this stuff? Give us some concrete examples. Is it just in computers?
Oh, no, it's everywhere. Seriously. Your computer's BIOS. Or the newer UEFI, this thing that starts booting your PC, that's firmware.
Right, the screen you see before Windows loads.
Exactly. Then you've got bootloaders, the things that actually load Windows or Linux. They're firmware, too. But also, think about the controller inside your super fast SSD drive.
That has its own software.
It does. And your Wi-Fi router, full of firmware running the show, smart devices, thermostats, cameras, fridges.
Even my fridge.
Probably. And definitely things like your car's infotainment system. It's really, really widespread.
Okay, here's the part that caught my attention from the outline. You mentioned it often runs before the main operating system boots up. Why is that such a big deal?
Yeah, that's the kicker. Because if an attacker can get malicious code into the firmware, say a rootkit.
A rootkit being super deep malware.
Exactly. If it's in the firmware, it loads before your operating system, before your antivirus, before most of your security tools even start.
Whoa!
So it gets this incredibly privileged position. It can hide really effectively because the OS-level tools they don't see down that far. And it's incredibly persistent.
Persistent how?
Well, think about it. If the malware is living on the motherboard firmware, not the hard drive, you could completely wipe the hard drive.
Reinstall Windows from scratch.
Yep, wipe it clean, fresh install.
Yeah.
And that firmware rootkit, still there, it survives.
Okay, that's genuinely unnerving. You mentioned a specific example, the scary stuff.
Yeah, Logex.
Yeah.
That was a real eye-opener for a lot of people. It was a rootkit specifically designed to infect the UEFI firmware.
The modern BIOS replacement.
Right. And it could absolutely survive OS reinstalls.
Right.
Imagine dealing with that. You think you've cleaned the machine, but the infection just comes right back after the reboot.
So much for nuke and pave fixing everything.
Exactly. It completely undermines that whole approach. It forces you to think about security at a much deeper level than just the OS and applications.
Okay, so attackers love it because it's sneaky and persistent. Big red flag for security teams. But flip that coin. Why should a forensic investigator care specifically about firmware beyond just finding that hidden malware?
Well, two main reasons, really. First, like we said, finding that deeply embedded persistent malware is crucial. If you miss it, the attacker still has access. Game over, you know?
Right, you haven't actually solved the problem.
Not at all. But second, the firmware itself, even non-malicious firmware, can hold really valuable evidence.
Like what? It's just low-level code, isn't it?
Sometimes, yes, but it often stores configuration data. System settings, network settings. It might contain logs, maybe not as detailed as OS logs, but logs nonetheless. Sometimes even credentials or keys might be cached in there inadvertently.
Okay. Give me a practical example. Where might this pay off?
Okay, think about a home Wi-Fi router. We investigate the suspect's laptop, maybe find nothing. But then we look at the router's firmware, and maybe we find stored DNS settings pointing to a malicious server, or logs showing VPN tunnels being set up to strange places, or like proxy configurations designed to reroute traffic secretly.
So the router could reveal the exfiltration route or command and control channels, even if the main computer looks clean.
Precisely. The router's firmware becomes a key witness to the network activity. It can show you how data was possibly siphoned off, or how traffic was manipulated, completely bypassing the endpoint's security.
Okay, that makes sense for network gear. What about the Internet of Things? You mentioned smart devices.
Yeah, absolutely critical there. Think about a smart security camera. Its firmware might store um, access logs, timestamps for motion detection,
Yeah.
maybe even small video clips or snapshots locally, separate from the cloud storage.
Even if the user deleted them from the app.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. Depending on how it's designed. Or a smart thermostat, its firmware might log network connections or temperature changes that could, help establish a timeline in an investigation. These devices often have minimal OS, so the firmware is the main place evidence might reside.
So ignoring firmware in these cases.
Means you could be missing the attacker's persistent backdoor, or you could be missing crucial logs and data points that tell you what actually happened.
Yeah.
A huge potential blind spot.
This definitely highlights why it's important, but it also sounds hard, like not something you just double-click on. How do investigators actually get at this firmware and analyze it?
Yeah, you're right. It's often not straightforward at all. The first challenge is just getting the firmware image.
How do you do that?
Well, sometimes you're lucky, and you can download a firmware update file directly from the manufacturer's website. That gives you an image you can analyze offline.
Okay, that sounds manageable.
But often it's not available, or you need the specific firmware from the device in question, so then you might need to physically interact with the hardware.
Meaning, like, open the device up.
Yep. You might need to connect specialized hardware like JTAG probes or SPI flashers directly to the circuit board to communicate with the memory chip that holds the firmware. Or in some cases, you might even need to physically remove the chip.
Wow, okay, chip-off analysis, that's getting pretty hardcore.
It can be, yeah. Especially for mobile devices or really embedded systems. But let's say you manage to get the firmware image one way or another. Then the analysis starts.
What tools do you use? Is there like a firmware explorer?
Not quite that simple. But a really common starting point is a tool called binwalk.
Binwalk.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It scans the firmware file, which is often just this big blob of binary data looking for signatures of known file types. It can find like compressed archives, file systems, executable code, configuration files, all embedded within that single firmware image. It helps you carve it up.
So it unpacks the blob.
Essentially, yeah. Or at least identifies the different parts. Then once you've maybe extracted those parts, you might use something like Firmwalker.
Okay.
Firmwalker is designed to crawl through those extracted file systems or unpack data, specifically looking for things like passwords, API keys, private SSL keys, interesting config files, URLs, basically sensitive stuff often left lying around in firmware.
So Binwalk dissects, Firmwalker searches for secrets. What else?
Well, sometimes you want to see how the firmware actually runs. For that, you might use an emulator. QEMU is a popular one.
Emulation, like running the firmware in a virtual machine.
Sort of, yeah. You're basically tricking the firmware code into running on your analysis machine within a controlled environment. This lets you observe its behavior, what network connections it tries to make, what files it accesses without actually running it on the original hardware or risking your own system.
That sounds useful, but complex.
It can be. But, sometimes the simplest tools are still incredibly useful. Just running the strings command to pull out readable text, or using hex dump to view the raw data, combined with grep to search for keywords. You'd be amazed what you can find sometimes. Clear text passwords, hidden debug menus.
So don't discount the basics.
Never discount the basics. And then, as we mentioned, there's always that chip-off analysis for when you really need direct access to the raw memory contents.
Okay, theory and tools are one thing. Let's make it real. Can you share a story, maybe anonymized, where firmware analysis was the key, where it actually cracked the case?
Sure. There was a case involving some illegal online activity. The investigators looked at the suspect's main computer, did a full forensic image, analyzed it, found very little. No obvious persistent malware, no clear indicators of the specific activity they were suspected of.
So a dead end on the computer.
Pretty much. But they had the suspect's home Wi-Fi router. So they decided, let's take a look at the firmware on that. They managed to dump it.
What did they find?
They found the firmware had been modified. The suspect had actually altered the router's software to automatically route all their internet traffic through the Tor network.
Whoa, so completely hidden from the computer's perspective.
Totally invisible at the OS level.
Good.
The computer just saw a normal internet connection via the router. All the anonymization was happening on the router itself, thanks to the modified firmware. That became the crucial piece of evidence linking the suspect's internet connection to the illicit activity.
That's a brilliant example of evidence hiding below the OS. Got another one.
Yeah, slightly different angle. An investigation involving a smart home device, specifically a smart doorbell with video recording. It saved clips locally and also synced to the cloud.
Okay. Standard setup.
Right. The user claims certain relevant video clips had been deleted. And indeed, they weren't visible in the user interface, on the app, nor in the cloud account. Looked like they were gone.
What?
But when we examined the firmware and the internal storage on the doorbell device itself, guess what?
The clips were still there.
Yep. The firmware's local file management hadn't actually overwritten or securely deleted those files, even though the pointers and the interface were gone. So the deleted video evidence was recoverable directly from the device's internal memory, accessed via firmware analysis techniques.
Wow. So that reinforces that idea of hidden evidence, that deleted doesn't always mean gone, especially on these embedded devices.
Exactly. Data can persist in places you might not expect, and firmware is often the gatekeeper to finding it.
Okay, it's clearly powerful and important, but let's be realistic. What are the big challenges? Why isn't everyone doing deep firmware analysis on every case?
Well, there are some significant hurdles. A huge one is just the sheer variety. There's no single standard for firmware. Every manufacturer, sometimes every device model, has its own proprietary format, its own way of doing things.
So no one-size-fits-all tool?
Definitely not. Then there's the lack of documentation. Companies, they don't usually publish detailed specs about how their firmware works internally, so a lot of it involves reverse engineering, which is slow, painstaking work.
Guesswork and experimentation.
A lot of it, yeah. And then you run into encryption. Sometimes the whole firmware image is encrypted, or maybe just critical parts of it. Breaking that can be, well, anywhere from difficult to practically impossible without the key.
And we already mentioned the hardware access issue.
Right. Needing specialized tools, maybe needing to solder or desolder components. That requires a different skill set and equipment than standard digital forensics.
Yeah.
It's just not a simple plug the drive into your workstation kind of process. I remember one time we spent like 3 days just trying to figure out the custom compression used on one specific firmware image. It was completely undocumented.
Sounds frustrating.
It can be incredibly frustrating, but also rewarding when you finally crack it.
So it demands specialized skills, patience, maybe some hardware know-how.
It really does.
Yeah.
But I think even if you're not going to become a full-time firmware reverse engineer, just understanding that this layer exists, understanding its potential impact, and knowing the basics of tools like binwalk, that's becoming increasingly crucial for any serious DFIR professional. You need to know what you might be missing.
Okay, good point. So wrapping this up, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with from this firmware deep dive?
Right. Number one, don't ignore firmware, period. Recognize it can hide malware and hold unique evidence.
Got it. Don't just focus on the OS.
Exactly. Number two, start learning the basics. Get familiar with tools like binwalk. Maybe try some emulation with QEMU. Understand what they do even if you don't use them daily.
Dip your toes in the water.
Yeah. Number three, practice. Get some cheap routers or IoT devices, download their firmware updates if you can, and just try analyzing them in a safe lab environment. See what you can find.
Hands-on experience.
Crucial. And finally, document everything, especially when you're learning. Document your process, your tools, what worked, what didn't work. Those failures are often where the best learning happens in this field.
Excellent advice. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. F is for firmware. Hopefully we've shed some light on this often shadowy corner of the digital world for you.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating area. And looking ahead for our next exploration, we're thinking of tackling another tricky topic, fileless malware, keeping with the theme of things that try to hide from standard view.
Ooh, another good one. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. And hey, if you found this useful, we'd love it if you could leave a review or follow the show. We're at F4Forensics on social media.
And always remember, just because it's out of sight doesn't necessarily mean it's out of scope for your investigation.
Couldn't have said it better. Stay curious, stay careful. Catch you next time.